Hello everybody and welcome! Kerbal Space Program 2 will launch in early access on February 24th, 2023. I already did a video on that and what is going to be in that version of the game 2 days ago. You can watch that by clicking on top or following the link in the video description. So why another video? Well, together with the announcement, the developers have released a new feature episode video aptly titled Episode 6 Early Access. It is a whopping 14 minutes long with almost half of that dedicated to gameplay footage. This means there's a lot to dissect and talk about. Also, some additional text information was released that I did not have access to before I was filming my first video. And I was able to have a short Q&A session with creative director Nate Simpson in the days leading up to the early access announcement, which will give us additional information to the items I'm talking about in this video. So, let's get right into it. 10 new things we learned from the KSP2 Early Access announcement. Windows first. Kerbal Space Program 2 Early Access will only be available on Windows for $49.99 US. And to make this perfectly clear, because a lot of people have asked, this price will include all future Early Access updates and the version 1.0 release. This was confirmed to me personally and on the KSP forums. No idea what happens beyond version 1.0 though. But there will be no Mac, no Linux and no console version of Early Access. Sorry. The developers are committed to bringing the full game to Xbox and PlayStation 5 after the feature-complete game is released on Windows. Mac and Linux are on the developers' extended roadmap, but so far there has been no definitive commitment yet like for consoles. On the other hand, KSP2 will be released on Steam. Together with their Proton compatibility layer, it is possible to run Windows games on Linux via Steam. But unless the game is actually out, we won't really know how well this is going to work, if at all, and how well you will be able to control your vehicles. Speaking of control, new user interface. For the first time, the user interface is front and center in the latest developer episode. And there is a lot to unpack here and a lot I have managed to get out of Nate Simpson during our short interview. That's why I will talk about this in more detail in a video coming out on Friday, October 28th. So please subscribe to this channel and ring the bell so you won't miss that. Believe me, it will be worth it. As someone who has worked on user interfaces professionally, I have a lot to talk about this topic. A topic the team was usually very tight-lipped about, but had at least some info this time around, is multiplayer. While Kerbal Space Program was inherently a single-player game and the sequel is also heavily focused on that, and will remain being playable offline, KSP2 was set to have multiplayer right from the start of development. But aside from telling us how much fun it is,
as we've been testing it internally, I have never heard people laugh so hard.
We haven't heard a lot of hard facts about this. There are a few hints in the feature episode though. For instance, there is a diagram with SP and MP on a whiteboard in the background, very likely single player and multiplayer. Granted, this could be just a prop for the video, but we also learned that there are 4 launch pads at the Kerbal Space Center where players can launch simultaneously and 2 runways that can likely be used by 2 players at the same time. I have asked creative director Nate Simpson if 4 players will be the limit of a multiplayer instance, and he responded that there will be significantly more concurrent players possible. But he wasn't willing to say how many it will actually be. What he did say was that the team is playing multiplayer regularly, since that part of the system is being developed in parallel to all the others like Interstellar and Colonies. So no, they will not start in multiplayer after Early Access is out. They are already actively working on it. I also addressed a few things I highlighted in my 5 problems Kerbal Space Program 2 multiplayer needs to solve video. Link up top and in the description. We specifically talked about the problem of time warp during multiplayer. Not only are the developers aware of it, they are, and I quote, very confident with the time warp solution. How this is going to work out in the end, we will have to see once multiplayer is actually available. But let's stick to time warp, because there was an interesting confirmation in the feature episode video. Burn during time warp. This is going to be one of the game changers for KSP2 compared to the original game. In the past, if you had a really long transfer burn, for instance to Jool or Elo or any of the outer planets, especially if you used nuclear or ion engine, those burns would take a lot of time. Lead designer Shana Markham said she went out and mowed the lawn while her vehicle was performing such a maneuver. This is of course detrimental for a fun gaming experience. That's why Kerbal Space Program 2 will enable you to execute a burn during time warp. That's right, your 3-hour ion engine burn can be done in a few seconds now. Maybe now people will actually use those engines. Information about what enables this was already published in a developer diary back in February. Burn during time warp is possible because the simulation part of KSP2, the thing that calculates all the required resources for what's happening in the game world, has been completely revamped. This is one of the examples for get the foundations right that they talk about in the feature episode. Getting the simulation fixed compared to KSP1 now enables them to do a whole lot of different things that were not possible with the original. This will also pay dividends when things like colonies and the resource system that are on the roadmap will be implemented. For me, this is a game-changing feature. And there is another. Procedural wings and aerodynamics. The video highlights procedural wings again. While the fact that those will come is not new in and of itself, we have confirmation that they will already be in the first early access release. I introduced this chapter of the video as a game changer, but don't take my word for it. Based on our internal testing, it changes everything. Not my words, those are the words of creative director Nate Simpson during our interview a few days ago. There are basically 3 types of procedural wings. Normal rigid wings, wings with integrated control surfaces, wings that are control surfaces. The interesting part here is that you can basically tweak everything about the wings, size and shape, and also position, size and shape of integrated control surfaces. This is a huge improvement over how things behaved in KSP1. And speaking of KSP1, the creator of that, Harvester, has been working on a similar feature in his current game, Balsa Model Flight Simulator. If you haven't, check it out, it's really fun. One thing that stuck out to me during my chat with Nate Simpson was how excited he was about all the airplane and aerodynamic stuff. He mentioned some creative ways people were using the new procedural wings, since they can of course be also used as structural elements. For instance, for Formula 1 race cars, this was something he specifically mentioned. More on driving and wheels in just a moment. He also talked about how you will be able to see the aerodynamic effects of how you shape your wings inside the VAB. But it is not yet certain if this will already be part of the first early access release. Nate mentioned some more things he would personally like to see implemented and down the road a more realistic aerodynamic system. But for the first release we will see something similar to what KSP1 had to offer, based on the fact that the original's aerodynamic system was, and I quote, predictable and offered a reasonably positive player experience. By the way, you can see in the video that the cockpits have transparent windows, while for instance this lander can does not. Nate Simpson said that it is their goal to have transparent windows on all command modules until the early access release. The rest of the crew modules might follow at a later point, but that will be something they will have to decide and prioritize based on our feedback during the early access phase. What we haven't seen anywhere so far are propellers. I mentioned in my previous video that robotic parts introduced with KSP1's Breaking Ground expansion will not be in KSP2. Maybe propeller engines will suffer the same fate, or they will be added later. I have to admit I forgot to ask them and just realized that while filming this video. Sorry. Now that we have talked about getting your vehicle through air, how about a liquid medium? So far the developers were not willing to talk about any specific parts for buoyancy or how that is going to work. Only that there will be a launch location for boats and that you will have to navigate large bodies of fluid on certain celestial bodies. Lathe and Eve come to mind, but also Puff, a planet shown in a show and tell video a while back. So vehicles will have to behave properly in a liquid. Speaking of vehicles behaving, how's my driving? New wheels? Wheels in Kerbal Space Program. A massive pain point for every player. Many things have changed in this regard over the years, but it was never really a great experience. Basically, wheels are rotating skis in the original game and controlling them is a chore. Nate Simpson acknowledged this in our Q&A session, saying, "We are aware this is a source of frustration for KSP1 players, so there is extra attention devoted to improving the driving experience in Kerbal Space Program 2. As we can clearly see from the released footage, there are going to be new wheel parts colored orange in this scene and colored white in another one." Nate mentioned that these were a good general-purpose wheel part. He also mentioned, as I said during the procedural wings portion earlier, that they were building race cars in their free time. So I guess the feature already provides some modicum of fun. But all of us are going to be the judges of that once we can get our hands on the early access release. Speaking of getting hands on the game, there is a specific group of people waiting to do exactly that. Modders. So let's talk about them. Commitment to modding. Having mod support in KSP2 was something the developers said they want to integrate from day one. And they specifically mentioned it in the current feature episode, saying they want to make things easier and more efficient for modders than it was in KSP1. It's also something they put in their press release, saying that KSP2 will be more mod-friendly than the original. And quite a few Kerbal Space Program modders have been or are working on the game. I already mentioned Chris Adderley, maybe better known as Nertea, who did the Restock and Near Future Tech mods. I think he sums it up best in one sentence.
Modder's gonna mod.
As someone who has benefited a lot from mods in my time in the first Kerbal Space Program, I hope there is going to be a vibrant modding community for KSP2 from day one. By the way, if you want to make a mod that plays an "again" soundbite every time you hit the revert to launch or revert to VAB button, hit me up, I can provide the sound file. Either way, I can't wait to discover what the community will create. Speaking of discovering, new Easter eggs. Something modders provided for the original was more things to explore, for instance with the Outer Planets mod that I enjoyed a lot. Well, the developers claim there will be new things to explore even in the basic Kerbiolar system. All planets have been revamped and now have a new terrain creation system, which is also designed to improve the game's performance. There will very likely be new Easter eggs to discover, as developer Marcos Salcedo alludes to us in the recent feature episode. He says of the planets, "I'm not gonna spoil anything, but they have a few surprises." What will those be? Let's go and find out together as soon as the game is available in February. Speaking of Easter eggs, something more! As is custom in these feature episode videos, there is something hidden in the audio at the end. Just like the Arecibo message, there are chunks of 23 elements that create an image. If you run the audio through a peak analyzer and convert the left and right peaks to zeros and ones, then run those through a binary image creation tool, you get this! Honestly, I'm not exactly sure what I'm looking at, and I might have a mistake somewhere converting the data, but let me know in the comments what you think we can see in this image, or come over on my Discord server where we can discuss about the potential meaning behind this message. By the way, Can I just say what a tragedy it is that the Arecibo telescope was destroyed and will not be rebuilt? A terrible loss for science, in my opinion. This takes away a tool for astronomers to peek into the unknown. Speaking of the unknowns, while we now have a better understanding of what will await us in the first early access release, there are still a lot of things we do not know. More details on multiplayer, for example, or regarding buoyancy I mentioned, and probably a lot of things the developers are not 100% certain themselves, since the game will change as soon as the feedback from early access will come in. One thing we can't really put our finger on yet is performance. While all parts of the game were overhauled compared to KSP1, and you will probably be able to build larger vehicles a lot easier than in the original, we will have to wait for KSP2 to come out and some weird people like yours truly to test its limits to see how far we can really go. Another thing that I noticed while watching the feature episode was perhaps a slip of the tongue by one of the developers. If you listen closely at the 10-minute and 45-second mark, Alexander Martin talks about colonies, multiple solar systems, further exploration, life support. At least that's what it sounds like to my ears. The subtitles on the YouTube video say colonies, multiple solar systems for exploration, mod support. Here's the soundbite, listen for yourself.
Multiple solar systems for the exploration, life support.
What do you think? For me, this sounds like life support. Sure, he might have misspoken, just like Shannon Markham called time warp time zoom, but maybe there is something like life support in the works. I mean, if colonies and a resource system are planned, then maybe a combination of these things can enable a life support simulation straight out of the box. Who knows? Unfortunately, this is all speculation at this point. Same as how many other solar systems we will be able to explore. On the roadmap, we can see the Deb system and another as of yet unnamed second system. Will that be all, or will there be even more at a later date? Or will new solar systems be added with DLC packs? I mean, from a business standpoint, that would make sense. On the other hand, if KSP2 is easier to mod than the original, I am sure we will see a lot of planet packs and community-created solar systems for free anyways. So that's about it for this time from my side. What do you think about the announcement and the details I highlighted in this video? Did I miss something? Do you disagree with any of my assessments? Let me know in the comments or over on my Discord server. You can also hop over on Patreon and become a supporter of this channel for just a small amount. Anyways, it is time to prepare ourselves for the upcoming release of KSP2 in February. And of course, for my next video, where I will talk in detail about the user interface. That is going to be released upcoming Friday, so be sure to watch that when it comes out.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel for more and follow me on my social thingies. The links are in the description. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.